"Get that mutt off my desk right now, Morales." Sheriff Daniel Whitaker's voice cracked through the room, heavy with the kind of rage that only years of buried frustration could sharpen. Papers scattered from the impact of the German Shepherds. Pause, a half-empty coffee mug, tipping and staining the corners of legal documents. Deputy Morales froze, eyes darting between his superior and the dog, unsure which demanded more control. But the shepherd named Titan stood, rigid, chest heaving, muzzle locked around a small leather pouch smeared with something dark. It wasn't random. Titan had carried it here with purpose. Sheriff Whitaker slammed a fist against the desk, but his anger was already thinning into unease. The pouch reeked of something metallic, sour and unforgettable. He'd smelled it once before, in the ruins of his brother's cabin after the fire that had taken 3 lives. Where did he get this, he demanded, his voice lower now, though trembling beneath the weight of memory. Morales stammered something about Titan refusing to release it during training, dragging officers away from the drill yard toward an old shed on the outskirts of town. The sheriff pried the pouch open with calloused fingers, his throat tightening, as he revealed what lay inside, a tarnished badge, dulled by years of neglect, still etched with the insignia of a federal agent, and along its edge, flakes of dried blood. For a moment, the room fell into silence. Even the creak of the courthouse ceiling fan seemed to halt. Whitaker's pulse thudded in his ears. Memories unraveling the federal investigator who had vanished from Pine Hollow 10 years earlier. The unsolved case that had humiliated his department. The night whispers of corruption and betrayal that had hollowed his career. Sir Morales spoke carefully. Titan led us straight to that shed without hesitation. It wasn't coincidence. His voice cracked with something close to awe. He knew the sheriff wanted to brush it off, dismiss it as a dog's random instinct. But the weight of the badge in his palm told a story far heavier than coincidence. He looked at Titan, whose amber eyes locked on him with startling intensity. This wasn't just about a lost federal officer. It was about everything Whitaker had tried to bury: his failures, his brother's death, and the case he'd been ordered to leave untouched. He dropped into his chair, suddenly weary. His hand brushed over the pouch again, and he noticed something tucked deep in the seam, a folded scrap of paper hardened by age. He unfolded it with deliberate care. Written in faint ink were coordinates, barely legible, but leading somewhere, far beyond the county line. His jaw tightened. Whoever had left this wanted it found, but why now? Across the room, Titan wind, the sound sharp, urgent, almost human. Whitaker's mind flashed back to his brother's last call before the fire, the one he had ignored in favor of political pressure. The guilt he carried had always been a dull ache, but in this moment it ripped open like a wound. He closed his eyes, remembering his brother's voice pleading, frantic, cut off by static. Now here was a dog, carrying pieces of that same buried truth straight onto his desk. "This doesn't stay local," Whitaker whispered finally, voice hoarse. Morales leaned closer, shocked by the words. The sheriff had always resisted outside involvement, always fought to keep Pine Hollow secrets buried, but today, something in him cracked. "Contact the Bureau. Tell them Titan just reopened their case." The deputy hesitated. "Sir, you're talking about resurrecting an investigation that tore this town apart. You sure you want that on your hands again?" The sheriff looked at the badge, then at Titan, who sat like a sentinel beside the desk, unflinching, steady. His hands trembled as he pressed the blood-stained metal to his chest. "It's already on my hands, Morales. It always has been." In the corner, the courthouse clock struck noon, its chimes echoing through the office like the tolling of a long reckoning. Outside, the summer heat pressed against the windows, the streets bustling with people unaware that their town's darkest ghost had just clawed its way back into daylight. Titan shifted, letting out a sharp bark that jolted both men, as if demanding they move, act, confront what had been ignored for too long. Sheriff Whitaker exhaled slowly, his eyes hardening with resolve. "Pack your gear," he ordered. "We're following the trail. If Titan's carried us this far, I'm not stopping until I know who left this message and why they chose to haunt me after all these years." The office air felt heavy, charged, as if the walls themselves knew the past was stirring. Morales gave a hesitant nod, but the sheriff was already standing, badge clenched in his fist, Titan at his side like an unspoken conscience. The old case was no longer a cold file locked away in dusty cabinets. It was alive, breathing, and it had just walked into the heart of Pine Hollow, carried in the jaws of a dog who refused to forget. And for the first time in a decade, Sheriff Daniel Whitaker allowed himself to believe that maybe the truth, however brutal, however damning, was finally ready to be unearthed. Sheriff Daniel Whitaker had always believed silence was safer than truth, but that belief cracked as he held the blood-stained badge. Titan stood firm beside his desk, ears pricked forward, gaze unwavering, as though he were waiting for the man to move past denial into action. Whitaker tried to steady his breath, but it rattled, uneven, betraying the fear gnawing inside him. He had built his career on discipline, keeping emotions locked behind a stone facade, yet this discovery shook him to the core. It wasn't just evidence, it was accusation, it was memory, and the weight of it pressed on him like a verdict. waiting to be read. The drive to the shed where Titan had found the pouch was tense, heavy with words left unsaid. Deputy Morales gripped the wheel tighter than usual, glancing at Whitaker from time to time, but the sheriff's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. Jaw clenched, his mind replaying fragments of the past. 10 years earlier, federal agent Caleb Monroe had vanished during a sting operation. Whitaker had been ordered to close the case prematurely, told that Monroe had gone rogue, but his gut had screamed otherwise. Then, days later, the fire that claimed his brother's life consumed whatever courage he might have had left to fight back. He had buried it all: his brother's death, Monroe's disappearance, the whispers of corruption, hoping time would dull the edges. Yet here he was, chasing ghosts led by a dog who refused to be silent. When they reached the shed, Titan lunged forward, pulling hard against his leash, almost dragging Morales into the dry grass. The building was old, its wood warped from years of storms, its windows smudged with dust and spite. Whitaker pushed the door open and was hit by a stale odor that made his stomach turn mildew oil, and something metallic, faint yet chillingly familiar. Titan whined and pawed at the floorboards, scratching furiously until his nails tore splinters. Whitaker dropped to his knees, heart hammering, and helped clear the boards until a hollow thud revealed a compartment below. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in faded canvas. With trembling hands, Whitaker unfolded it, revealing stacks of files, their edges brittle with age. Each was marked with the Bureau's insignia, stamped with the word confidential. His throat tightened as he flipped through pages that detailed names, dates, surveillance notes, all centered on a smuggling operation that had run through Pine Hollow's back roads. It wasn't random corruption. It was organized, calculated, sanctioned by men in positions higher than his own. And at the top of one report was a signature Whitaker knew too well, his former mentor, Sheriff Leonard Givens. A chill crept through him. Givens had been the reason Whitaker had joined law enforcement, a man he once considered untouchable in integrity. The idea that the mentor who had guided him could have orchestrated Monroe's disappearance was too heavy to bear. His chest constricted, rage and grief colliding in equal measure. He was protecting himself, Whitaker muttered, voice hoarse. He buried Monroe, buried the whole damn case, and I let him. The confession hung in the air, raw and bitter. Morales looked at him, torn between duty and disbelief. As Whitaker stood, files clutched to his chest, Titan barked sharply, his gaze fixed on the far corner of the shed. Whitaker followed his line of sight and froze. Nailed to the beam was a strip of fabric, scorched at the edges, the initials JW stitched clumsily into its corner. His brother's initials. The world tilted beneath him as memories of the fire rushed back. How he had convinced himself it was an accident. How he had never questioned the convenience of the blaze happening right after the Monroe case collapsed. Now the fabric told a darker story. His brother had been silenced, not lost to chance. Whitaker staggered back, his knees threatening to give out. The files in his hand suddenly felt like lead, each page weighted with the blood of the men he had failed. Titan pressed against his legs, steadying him, grounding him, as though the dog could sense the storm of guilt tearing through him. Morales stepped forward, his voice shaking. Sheriff, if this is true, then Pine Hollow was never just a town caught in bad luck. It was a cover. Whitaker could barely form words, his throat raw with the ache of betrayal. All these years, he whispered, I've been protecting the man who destroyed everything I loved. I thought I was loyal. I thought I was preserving the department, but I was just blind. Long silence filled the shed, broken only by Titan's restless breaths. Then, in one sudden motion, Whitaker slammed the files onto the table, resolve hardening through his grief. His voice, when it came, carried no hesitation. We take this to the Bureau tonight. If Givens was behind this, if he killed Monroe and covered it with my brother's blood, then we drag him into the light. Morales' eyes widened at the conviction in his superior's tone. It was not the weary man he had known, buried under decades of compromise. This was someone else, someone resurrected by grief, driven by guilt, ignited by justice. Titan barked again, sharp and fierce, as though sealing the vow, but even as Whitaker spoke, doubt gnawed at him. A man like Givens wouldn't have survived this long without weaving his influence deep into federal ranks. Exposing him would be dangerous, maybe even fatal, for both of them. Yet the alternative, staying silent, protecting a traitor, was unbearable. He had already lost his brother to silence. He wouldn't lose his soul to it too. As the sun dipped outside, casting long shadows through the cracks in the shed walls, Whitaker felt the weight of his decision. The past he had buried was alive again, clawing its way into the present, and it demanded justice. Titan stood ready, Morales uncertain, but Whitaker knew there was no turning back. The dog had carried the truth into his office, and now it was his burden to carry into the world for the first time in years. Sheriff Daniel Whitaker felt the stirrings of something he had long abandoned, hope laced with fury, sharp as fire. The reckoning was coming, and he would not face it as a man of silence anymore. The drive out to the coordinates was long and heavy, every mile dragging Sheriff Whitaker deeper into memories he had fought to smother for years. The sun hung low in the sky, spilling bruised streaks of orange and purple across the horizon. and the hum of the cruiser filled the silence between him, Morales, and Titan, who sat alert in the back seat, gaze fixed out the window as if he knew exactly where they were headed. Whitaker gripped the wheel tighter than he needed to, his knuckles pale, his mind circling back to the fire that had claimed his brother. It was never officially tied to the missing federal agent, but he had always known the two were linked. Tonight, that connection pulsed like a live wire beneath his skin. Morales broke the silence first. "You think we're walking into trouble, don't you?" His voice carried more worry than curiosity, a tremor that betrayed the unease clawing at both of them. Whitaker didn't answer right away, his eyes narrowing as the road curved into a forgotten stretch of farmland long since left to rot. The barns were collapsed skeletons against the skyline, weeds choking fence posts, the entire place heavy with neglect. "Trouble's the only thing that ever waits out here," he muttered finally, voice rough with resignation. When they arrived at the exact coordinates, Titan's demeanor changed. He barked once, sharp and urgent. Before leaping from the back seat, the second Morales opened the door. His paws hit the cracked dirt with force, nose pressed to the ground, leading them toward a sagging structure that looked more like a tomb than a barn. Whitaker's heart hammered. The last time he had stood in this part of Pine Hollow, it had been to search for his brother's remains. He had found only ash and silence. Now, as Titan scratched furiously at the warped door, Whitaker felt the past clawing back with violent determination. Inside, the stench of decay slammed into them. Dust hung heavy in the air, particles dancing in the narrow beams of moonlight breaking through the slats. Titan pulled hard on the leash, guiding them deeper into the gloom until his claws scraped against something buried beneath a rotting top. Morales hesitated, but Whitaker tore the top back himself, his breath catching at what lay underneath. A box deal, rusted, padlocked, and smeared with the same dark stains that clung to the badge Titan had carried earlier. Morales stepped back, whispering, "Jesus, Sheriff, this is evidence. Real evidence." His face paled, sweat glistening at his temple as if he already knew this discovery was about to reopen wounds far beyond their small town. Whitaker crouched low, fingers grazing the lock. It wasn't new. Someone had sealed this away years ago, someone who had wanted it hidden but not destroyed. The question screamed louder than the pounding of his heart. Who left it? Why here? And why now? Titan growled low, the sound vibrating in the pit of Whitaker's chest. It wasn't the sound of fear, it was warning, primal and urgent. Whitaker lifted his eyes and caught the faintest glimmer in the shadows, something metallic shifting in the far corner. Before he could speak, a voice cut through the darkness, deep, deliberate, dripping with familiarity. "I told you once, Daniel, some graves are better left unmarked." Every nerve in Whitaker's body went cold. He recognized that voice instantly, though it had been a decade since he last heard it. It belonged to Henry Coulter, the man once sworn to protect Pine Hollow as his deputy, the same man who had vanished when the federal agent disappeared. Whitaker had convinced himself Coulter was dead, swallowed up by guilt or by whoever orchestrated the fire. But now, here he was, live, breathing, and stepping into the half-light like a ghost made flesh. Morales reached for his weapon, but Whitaker's hand shot out, stopping him. His heart thundered with rage and grief, every muscle in his body screaming for answers. "You were supposed to be gone," he said, voice low, shaking with years of betrayal. Coulter's mouth twisted into a bitter smile. "Gone? Yes. Forgotten? Never." His eyes dropped to Titan, still growling, hackles, raised teeth bared. "Then it looks like your mutt has finally dragged you where you should have been all along." The barn seemed to shrink around them, the air suffocating, heavy with secrets pressing in from every corner. Whitaker's pulse roared as he stared at the man who had once been his brother in arms, now standing as the key to everything he had lost. Titan snarled louder. Morales tightened his grip on the holster, and Whitaker realized in that moment that the past wasn't just resurfacing, it was standing in front of him, armed with answers he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. Silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, tense, thick with everything that had gone unsaid for 10 years. And as Coulter stepped closer, his boots echoing on the wooden floorboards, Whitaker understood with bone-deep certainty that nothing about Pine Hollow would ever be the same again. The courthouse walls felt colder than the air outside, as if the building itself had absorbed years of secrets and grief. Sheriff Whitaker walked the narrow hallway with Titan padding close at his heel, the sound of the dog's claws clicking against the old floorboards echoing louder than his own boots. Morales trailed behind, clutching the folded scrap of paper, with the coordinates, his face pale with a nervous energy that spoke louder than words. Whitaker had seen that look before on rookies sent into fires they weren't ready to fight. Only this time, the fire was his past. They reached the sheriff's office. But the moment Whitaker shut the door behind them, Morales spoke. "Sir, you need to think about what this means. That badge, that blood, it ties everything back to you, to your brother." His voice trembled on the last word, as if he regretted saying it out loud. Whitaker's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing on the badge still resting in his palm. It wasn't just evidence. It was a wound ripped open in front of the very man who had spent years pretending it had healed. "I don't need reminding," Whitaker said harshly, but the strain in his voice betrayed him. He sat heavily at his desk, fingers brushing across the badge until they trembled too much to hold it. His brother's face flickered in his mind, the laugh, the stubborn kindness, the fear in his voice on that final night. He had buried all of it beneath duty, anger, and silence, and yet here it was, carried back to him in the mouth of a dog who wouldn't let go of the truth. Titan let out a low growl, not of menace, but as if urging him forward. Whitaker lifted his head and found the dog's eyes locked on him, unwavering. It was more than instinct, it was insistence. The room grew heavier, and in that silence Morales unfolded the scrap of paper again, reading the coordinates aloud. The numbers felt like a curse, pulling them to a place that had waited in the shadows for far too long. Whitaker stood, his voice steadying even as his heart twisted. "We go tonight." Morales stared at him in disbelief, but Whitaker didn't. "Whether if I've run from this for 10 years, that's long enough." The hours that followed stretched thin with preparation. By dusk, they were driving down the old highway, Titan restless in the back seat, whining every so often as though he sensed what lay ahead. The sun dropped low, casting the world in bruised shades of orange and violet, the horizon sharp against the fields. Whitaker gripped the steering wheel tight, each mile dragging him deeper into the gravity of what waited. When they reached the clearing marked on the paper, the air felt wrong, too still, too heavy, as if the ground itself remembered what had been buried here. Titan leaped from the vehicle before Whitaker could call him back, bounding straight into the tree line. Sheriff followed, Morales struggling to keep up, until they broke through into a space that hadn't seen light in years. The shed stood there, leaning with age, its wooden boards blackened and cracked. Whitaker's stomach clenched. He had seen this place once before, on a stormy night when his brother had begged him to come. He hadn't listened then, and now, fate had dragged him back with no choice left. Titan's bark split the silence, sharp and urgent, as he paused at the base of the shed. Whitaker rushed forward, kneeling to see what the dog had uncovered. The dirt had been disturbed, freshly turned, as if someone had been here not long ago. His breath caught. This wasn't a forgotten grave. This was something ongoing. Morales' voice shook. "Sheriff, someone's still using this place." For the first time in years, Whitaker's fury and fear rose together, not against his failures, but against whoever had kept this horror alive. He clenched his fists, the old badge pressing painfully into his palm. Titan growled again, low and steady, his body rigid as if bracing for what was about to surface. Dud. And in that moment, Whitaker realized the truth he had been running from was not buried in the past. It was alive, waiting for him, and it had just stirred awake. The shed's silence was suffocating, broken only by Titan's steady growl as his paws scraped against the loose earth. Sheriff Whitaker knelt, heart pounding, and with trembling hands, brushed away the dirt until fragments of bone and scraps of fabric surfaced beneath the weak beam of his flashlight. Morales staggered back, muttering a prayer, but Whitaker didn't move. He could see enough to understand. This was where the missing agent had been left, buried like an inconvenient truth in the soil of Pine Hollow. The badge in his pocket burned, against him, no longer just evidence but a symbol of the justice that had been denied. For years he had carried the guilt of ignoring his brother's last call, convincing himself that silence was survival. But now, staring into the grave, he knew silence had only fed the rot that lingered in his town. Titan pressed against his side, eyes unyielding as though demanding he make the choice his brother never had the chance to. Whitaker's breath shuddered as he rose, his voice low but steady. "This ends here. No more running, no more burying." The words weren't just a vow to Morales or to Titan, they were a vow to himself, to the brother he had failed, and to the truth clawing its way back into daylight. As dawn broke, light spilled over the clearing, washing the shed in muted gold. It was not absolution, but it was clarity. Whitaker turned to Morales, who stood pale and shaken but resolute, and handed him the folded scrap with the coordinates. "Take this to the bureau. Tell them we found their man." Morales nodded, his eyes wide with something between fear and admiration. Whitaker lingered a moment longer, resting his hand on Titan's head. The dog's body leaned into him, warm and unwavering, as if bridging the years of loss and regret. For the first time, Whitaker felt the weight of his brother's memory shift, not gone, not forgiven, but carried differently, no longer hidden. As he stepped back toward the path, Titan close at his heel, he glanced once more at the shed and the grave it had concealed. The wind moved through the trees, scattering leaves across the disturbed soil, as though nature itself was sealing away the lie at last. He walked on without looking back, knowing that this time, the truth would follow.